Allora, dopo il video che ci permette
So
di
after the video that has allowed us to enter into the spirit of the sanctuary of Soriano, which is at the center of our webinar of today, it is a joy and honor for me to be able to welcome all of you that follow us today through the various digital platforms. Like last time, we have participants from all over the world. We have fixed this time of this event in the evening time of Rome to facilitate the presence of participants from the Americas. You are all very welcome. So first of all, before saying anything else, I would like to treat 3 points. The first point is the translation. For those who follow via Zoom, it is possible to follow the translation Italian-English by clicking on the icon of the world sphere that you will find below on the right-hand side of the screen. I repeat this in English as well, if there are any Anglophones that have not found the right chain or channel. So this is for those who are following via Zoom. For those who are following via YouTube, please search for the YouTube language channel of the Angelicum. Both links are present, Italian and English. So this is the first point, the translation. Then the second point, practical point, are questions. So you are invited to ask questions during the presentation that will be included in the discussion at the end of the 3 presentations, the one of the main speaker and the brief ones of the 2 respondents. For those who are following via Zoom, you are asked to click on the button You and I, which is below to add questions. For those who are following via YouTube, you are asked to add questions in the comments section. And the third point, practical point, there is a folder online, as we would have normally given a folder to people who would have frequented in real presence, in person. So we are now giving an online folder, and from the Renaissance, and in particular of the Thomas School. Our first respondent is Professor Teresa Di Bonito, psychologist, psychotherapist, and faculty of psychology, and responsible for psychological listening in the Institute of Religious Sciences at the PUST in Rome, member of the council, directional council of psychotherapists and behavior, group behavior, and responsible for group psychotherapy, and also a member at the Commission for Exams for the habilitation to the exams of psychologists, and also member of faculty of psychotherapy and training school of Rome, cognitive psychotherapy and behavioral psychotherapy, and also secretary of ONLUS, and also faculty member of a second degree school for mental hygiene, the influence of the worship of Saint Dominic in the story of the province. And during his residency as secretary to the master in Rome, he has had the chance of preaching. After these presentations, I am happy to pass the word to Father Efrem Jindráček and his presentation. Thank you. Good evening to all of you. A salute to all of you from Rome and to all our participants. So I'd like to share with you certain slides to facilitate this presentation. I hope that you can tell at its head. The situation changed radically after February 7th, 1783, when the entire Calabria region was devastated by a terrible earthquake, and the sanctuary embarked on a long and slow path marked by periods of renewal and decline. As for our topic, I should at least point out several restorations of this image carried out in 1783, 1956, 1961, and finally one in 1982 by Professor Ugo Borghese. The main purpose of this presentation, however, does not aim at a detailed history of this mysterious event, nor is it concerned with a historical, critical, or aesthetic artistic analysis of the image, but would like to aim at highlighting the role of this extraordinary canvas as a tool for the passing on of certain Christian values and ideas which possess a real sense of preaching. What does this painting express? It's a canvas of 1980 by 1255 millimeters, painted in tempera, where the central figure resides Saint Dominic, 1386 millimeters high, dressed in full religious attire. In his right hand, he holds a book which lacks much detail, but which can be interpreted according to its common attributes, as the Bible, the New Testament, or as the rule or constitutions of the order. In his left hand, he holds a lily, which is a traditional symbol of virginity. Friar Silvestro Frangipane, the prior of this convent, and the first writer who systematically dealt with this painting in the first decades of the 17th century, cites the following. In mediocre stature, handsome in appearance, but venerable and mortified, with a rather sharp face and an aquiline nose. Most of the hair is white, and so is the beard. As of the rest, they show, which go somewhat red, the face is very white and has pallor. The eyes are very serene, and from every side, they look at us. They gaze with a very pleasant terror. The clothes and the dress do not go beyond the ankle, remaining the whole foot of black shoes covered. Figurative art, painting in particular, made the most of this theme from the 17th century onwards, as brought to evidence by countless copies, and especially the original variations on this theme. The typology of this painting took on approximately 3 modifications or particular forms. In the first instance, it is copies of the image itself, number 1. Number 2, the scene of the miracle of September 15th, 1530, particularly dear to the Baroque painters. And less common, number 3, are the images of Saint Dominic or of the painting, surrounded by the various miracles recorded by Silvestro Frangipane or by Antonino Lembo, another authoritative chronicler and representative of the Sorianese worship. Typology of the worship. What kind of Christian worship inspires this image? In general, we can say that it is always about the so-called doulia, a technical theological term that comes from the Greek doleia, which etymologically means servitude, or in other words, the cult of veneration due to the saints, a form that is distinct from the worship due to God, latria, and from that due to the Madonna, hyperdulia. Certainly, one of the most significant forms of preaching through a figurative theme is the public and official worship of the church, the liturgical worship that was approved for the Sorianese mystery after several particular indulgences granted by the popes already in the first half of the 17th century, and definitively confirmed with an office of the canonical hours and a mass established for the whole Dominican order on September 15th, the anniversary of the descent of the painting, which bears the date of the general chapter celebrated in Rome in 1644. In the 20th century, due to the mandatory church-wide feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, the feast of San Domenico in Soriano was moved to September 25th. Only from 1962, the feast disappears from the Dominican calendar as it is mandatory and remains in force in Soriano with the ancient date of September 15th, despite the fact that elsewhere it could be celebrated as a votive mass of Saint Dominic. The other aspect of liturgical worship is represented by the churches and chapels dedicated to Saint Dominic in Soriano. Although among the Dominican convents existing in the 17th or 18th century, we hardly find one that does not have at least one Sorianese altar. I would like to mention at least one found in Molfetta, Puglia, from 1636, in Alcamo, in Naples, in Piazza Dante, in 1673, in Mendoza, in Argentina, Antequera in Mexico, Guimar of the Canaries of 1649, Villa Santo Domingo in Soriano in Uruguay, and lest we forget our chapels in Rome dedicated to Saints Dominic and Sisto, or of Saint Santa Maria sopra Minerva, or in Krakow in Poland. These are true masterpieces of figurative art, which combines painting with sculpture and architecture to give an original and suggestive expression to the story told each time. With the worship, various confraternities, lay confraternities have also been linked from the beginning with the worship of the Soriano painting. Among these, I would like to mention at least one of the oldest, such as the Venerable Company of San Domenico in Soriano di Castiglione del Lago, founded in 1638, which continues to exist, and the ceremony of dressing children in the Dominican habit, a centuries-old ceremony of the order, which, however, is not exclusively connected with the Soriano worship. We must also remember another devotion, which is much more specific to the worship of the Sorianese painting, represented by the belts or fescues, or so-called zagarelle, cut according to the size of the painting or of the figure of Saint Dominic depicted in it, and subsequently blessed with the liturgical formula approved in 1713, and eventually also anointed with oil from the burning lamp in front of the canvas. These fescues are then used on several occasions to implore the protection of Saint Dominic for the sick, either of people or of animals, pets, but particularly for expectant women as a blessing for a happy delivery. Today, they are mainly distributed by the Dominican nuns of Krakow. We can assume that this type of devotion finds a link or inspiration in the Acts of the Apostles from chapter 19, when we read that God, meanwhile, worked uncommon wonders through Paul, to the point that they put on the sick handkerchiefs or aprons that had been in contact with him, and the diseases ceased and the evil spirits fled. Then we have the use of the lamp oil, which is a widespread practice and centuries old in Christian culture in the countries of Byzantine culture, such as the Roman one. However, it is not really specific to the worship of the picture, but of the painting, but traditionally connected with it. We have the medals as well, minted with a Sorianese image and inscription that we can find especially in the Italian territory, are also a common part of other similar devotions. After this brief panorama, we come to the main ideas or doctrines of this slightly uncommon form of preaching. First of all, the canvas of Soriano confirms and updates one of the articles of the Catholic faith already expressed in the creed, in the symbol of the apostles, when we profess, I believe, the communion of saints. The Christian is not alone. God has placed him in friendly company of the saints who help and accompany him. Saint Dominic of Caliruega is presented as a true father and patriarch, a mighty thaumaturge, always close to his devotees and to those in need. Soriano's miracle is also at times explained in the context of the fourth commandment of the Decalogue, interpreted analogically: honor your father, Saint Dominic, and your mother, Our Lady, and the Saints Mary Magdalene and Catherine of Alexandria, the patroness and co-patrons of the order, so that your days may be prolonged in the land of the Lord your God gives you. As we can see in the famous fresco of Giorgio Wenceslao Reiner in the Dominican church of Sant'Egidio in Prague. The second major theme connected with the Sorianese worship is the worship of sacred images, which is not only lawful, but deserving, approved in this context by means of a clear prodigy during the stormy 16th century Protestant controversy. Here, as well, we stand before a doctrine approved and mentioned much earlier, for example, at the Second Ecumenical Council of Nicaea in 787, which resolved and approved the worship of images we call iconodulia. We define with all rigor and care that, like the representation of the precious and life-giving cross, so the venerable and holy images, whether painted or in mosaic or in any other suitable material, must be exhibited in the holy churches of God, on the sacred furnishings, on the sacred vestments, on the walls and tables, in the houses and in the streets. Be they the image of the Lord God and our Savior Jesus Christ, or that of our Immaculate Lady, the Holy Mother of God, of the holy angels, of all the saints and the just. In fact, the more frequently these images are contemplated, the more those who contemplate them are brought to the memory and desire of what they represent, and to pay them respect and veneration by kissing them. It is certainly not a question of true adoration reserved by our faith only for the divine nature, but of a worship similar to that which is rendered to the image of the precious and life-giving cross, to the holy gospels and other sacred objects, honoring them with the offering of incense and lights according to the pious use of the ancients. The honor given to the image in reality belongs to the one who is represented in it, and whoever venerates the image venerates the reality of whoever is reproduced in it. In the 16th century, however, numerous Protestant reformers, including Udarrico Zwingli, Andrea Carlostadio, and Giovanni Calvino, encouraged the destruction of religious images by appealing to the prohibitions of the Pentateuch and the Ten Commandments. Thus, this veneration was regarded as a pagan heresy, a superstition. Martin Luther himself supported a more moderate position, attributing an important educational role to Christian art, but he too denied a true cult of sacred images or the intercession of the saints. The first iconoclastic destructions made by Protestants are documented in Zurich in 1523, and Geneva in 1535, in Switzerland, in Copenhagen, in Denmark, in Wittenberg, 1522. A similar phenomenon also affected France, Bohemia, the Netherlands. St. Martin's Basilica in Tours, or the Cathedral of the Holy Cross of Orléans, were seriously damaged and destroyed. The Jumièges Abbey, the Cathedral of St. Peter of Angoulême, the Basilica of St. Magdalene in Vézelay were sacked, like the Cathedral of St. Vitus in Prague in 1619. And suffice to recall the sacking of Rome in 1527. The Council of Trent's response is well known. At the 25th session of December 3rd of 1563, the decree of the Invocation, Veneration, and Relics of saints and sacred images was promulgated, where we read that the Holy Synod commands all bishops and those who hold the office and the charge of teaching that, first of all, they should diligently instruct the faithful on the intercession of the saints, on their invocation, on the honor due to the relics, and on the legitimate use of images, and should teach that the saints, reigning with Christ, offer their prayers for men to God. That is also good and useful to invoke them with supplication and to have recourse to their prayers, their power, and their help, to implore the benefits from God through his Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, who is our only Redeemer and Savior. Furthermore, the images of Christ, the Virgin Mother of God, and the other saints must be kept and preserved in churches. Due honor and veneration must be attributed to them. Certainly not because it is believed that there is some divinity or virtue in them for which they should be venerated, but because the honor attributed to them refers to the prototypes which they represent. Through the images, therefore, which we kiss and before which we discover and prostrate ourselves, we adore Christ and venerate the saints whose likeness they show. If anyone teaches or believes the opposite of these decrees, let him be anathema. And with great caution, he adds that in the invocation of the saints, moreover, in the veneration of relics and in the sacred use of images, all superstition is banned. Every shameful search for money is eliminated. And so that these provisions are observed more faithfully, this Holy Synod establishes that it is not permissible for anyone to place or have an unusual image placed in a place or in a church, however exempt, if it has not been previously approved by the bishop, nor admit new miracles or accept new relics unless after the judgment and approval of the bishop himself. Should any complications or question arise about these problems, the bishop must, before deciding, must wait for the opinion of higher ranking figures and the bishops of the region in the provincial council. However, things should be done in such a way as not to establish anything new or unusual in the church without first having consulted the Most Holy Roman Pontiff. From these pages, we can better understand not only the relevance of the worship of the painting within its time, but also a long and rigorous procedure to which this phenomenon had to and was subjected. The third and last theme is connected with the preaching of the Sorianese sacred canvas, is the help of God through Saint Dominic, invoked as a thaumaturge in the very different situations and needs of the people of God. We're not dealing here with members of the Dominican order, nor people tormented by the iconoclastic heresy. The invocation of Saint Dominic in Soriano is found among the Calabrian, Neapolitan, and Sicilian peasants in Malta, Croatia, among indigenous people of America, Peru, Mexico, Uruguay, in the Philippines, or in China, and Macau. In these cases, it's a question of a faith in the communion of saints and in the grace of God in the face of daily difficulties. According to these three essential themes, we can also better understand the manner in which the Soriano painting worship propagated throughout the world. The first advocates were naturally the Dominicans. We're referring to their sanctuary, to their founder and main patron of the order. Apart from the Dominican priests, the cooperative friars took part in the Sorianese preaching. This was not only limited to the famous Friar Lorenzo, who received the canvas and handed it to his superior, but also Friar Alonso Lopez Herrera, known as the Divine Herrera, a skilled painter who was active in Mexico. We must also mention the Dominican laity, the tertiaries, and the lay brotherhoods, such as the Dominican nuns, still presently active in the preparation of the Cingoli. Another group that we cannot overlook in this ongoing preaching has been those belonging to other orders. The main architect of the sanctuary in Soriano, who was a Carthusian friar named Bonaventura Presti from Bologna, the royal engineer and architect of the Kingdom of Naples, Franciscans, Capuchins, the Poor Clares, the Benedictines, the Girolamini, the Carmelites, or Cardinal Ernesto Adalberto Tarach, the Grand Master of the Order of the Pink Star Crucigers, who personally brought this image to Moravia and Bohemia with the blessing of Pope Alexander VII. From a geographical point of view, the worship naturally spread throughout Italy due to obvious spatial, linguistic, and cultural proximity. The other line followed the domination of the Spanish Empire from Calabria, incorporated into the Kingdom of Naples under the rule of the Habsburg Spain, through Spain itself, to New Spain, which means Mexico, Peru, Uruguay, Macau, and the Philippines. Yet another line can be spotted in the countries of the Holy Roman Empire, struck by the Protestant reform, where the preaching of the sacred canvas took an explicit and effective counter-reformational tone Bohemia, Moravia, Austria, Germany, but also in Belgium, the Flanders, the Netherlands, and in Poland. A completely unique case is the worship of the painting in a non-Catholic environment by the Armenian Apostolic Church in Yerevan, documented as early as the 17th century. It would be unfaithful to historical reality to argue that the Soriano's phenomenon is entirely singular and that it does not have a comparison or analogy between similar forms of worship or preachings of the Catholic Church. Among other things, such a statement could cast doubt on the lawfulness of the worship itself, if we recall well the Tridentan Decree. Certainly, we can also recall several other similar but never identical cases. We know well that in the Universal Church, various acheropetes of Christ are venerated, such as the Shroud of Turin, the Veil of Veronica, in the Holy Face of Manopello, the Face of Christ of the Scala Santa in Rome, or the Marian acheropete, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Maria Santissima Acheropita of Rossano, and the icon of Montallegro in Rapallo. Moreover, in the order of preachers, we know some comparable forms of worship. The angelic girdle of St. Thomas Aquinas in Chieri, connected with the angelic militia, or the Madonna of Pompeii, connected with the Arch Confraternity of the Most Holy Rosary, and with the disclosure of the devotion itself. Each of these forms of worship carries something similar, but at the same time, something which is also specific and original. Before concluding this presentation, I would like, at least in a few words, to recall some criticisms or difficulties that belong to Soriano's devotion. Apart from the skepticism or rejection of similar forms of worship by rationalists and agnostics, who for various doctrinal or ideological reasons cannot even admit the existence of such worship, we must mention some historical events that have overshadowed this preaching in particular. Without doubt, it is the devastating Calabria-wide, region-wide earthquake dating February 7th of 1783, which in a certain way marked the end of the glorious sanctuary as it was known before. Another negative event was the suppression of religious orders in the 19th century due to the Napoleonic Wars and the unification of the Kingdom of Italy, including the disappearance of the province of Calabria and a long absence of Dominicans in Soriano, who returned permanently in 1942. Paradoxically, what has complicated yet again the worship of this canvas from a political point of view was the so-called second miracle of Soriano, meaning the animation of the statue of San Domenico, which took place on September 15th, 1870. I think that we can conclude this presentation maybe with the most recent criticism presented by Professor Fanelli of 2018, where the author repeats arguments already known and to which Father Barillaro has answered, a worthy Dominican scholar. There's a temporal gap between the canonical recognition or the analogy with other cults mentioned. I believe I can conclude that the preaching of the image of San Domenico in Soriano represents a very original form of the Dominican mission, and not only due to the fact that through this canvas, the sacred image, a cultured worship with different liturgical, doctrinal, artistic, popular, and folkloric consequences develops. The greatest glory of the Soriano sanctuary undoubtedly reached its peak in the Baroque era. Later, it underwent several periods of decline and modest revival. Because of this, it is interesting to see how, in the past 80 years, an interdisciplinary interest in this phenomenon has taken shape, starting from the return of the Dominican community to Soriano in 1942, the restoration of the painting in 1982, or the numerous papers recently published on this topic, which try to make an uncommon preaching understood again through a sacred image, which still attracts many worshipers. My dear participants, brothers and sisters, I thank you for your attention. And I believe that we've come to the conclusion of this presentation. Thank you, and a good evening to all of you. Thank you, Father Efrem. You have presented an example of this preaching situated in a context, a very particular context, in its history and in its cultural elements of charity, and built around an image, around an artistic object, even if considered prodigious. Your theme was very interesting, touching the theme of preaching and the arts. It is the moment to repeat that we are very interested in your questions. You can always add through the chat feed, Q&As, or on YouTube. So we see a tight relation between art and preaching in Father's speech. And we can explore this even more in Professor Teresa's Di Bonito's that we are happy to pass the word on to. Thank you. Good evening to all of you, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm sharing my screen with my slides. I will try to most synthetic as possible, even if the topic would require many more minutes than what have been allocated to it, but we'll try to do our best and to understand the current meaning of the cult of Saint Dominic. Here it is. So to understand the importance, the actual importance, we would need to start from some premises, and then going to search the words of certain anthropologists, two in particular, who have taken care of, who have dealt with the sacred in popular culture. I will speak of globalization and identity and belonging, to understand how globalization and the traditions can intertwine. We were saying, so artists have always drawn inspiration from sacred stories and have sought answers to mystery. So they've asked themselves, what was after the existence was the main question. So they wanted to confront the fear and to clarify their suppositions. They have conducted various investigations and research, and the artists have expressed themselves in the most congenial way, with the certainty of being finite, but aiming at immortality. Through the sacred, we can go look for a relationship, a more direct relationship in our existence and beyond. In the meanwhile, one of the premises is the word sacred, which means separated. In all communities, everything that pertained to sacred has always been managed by people separate from the rest of the community, separated in the physical sense, and in places as well, separated in places. So we're speaking about temples, churches, mosques, synagogues, and with a temporal separation as well from the times of work and everyday life, such as religious holidays, Sundays, and also through objects and actions that are separated, specifically because they're objects of attention or prohibitions, particular prohibitions, such as taboos, commandments, rituals connected to worship. One of the anthropologists who have addressed this theme of the sacred and of folklore in southern Italy was Ernesto da Martino, a historian of religions and an ethnographer specialized in matters of the South. And he revolutionized the anthropological research and involved a team of people, not only anthropologists, but psychologists and many other experts that went on the field door by door to investigate and to ask directly what would the relationship of people and with daily life and also with rituals through investigations that are witnessed in the Museum of Popular Arts, of Traditions and Popular Arts here in Rome, where we can find the heritage through photographs, but also video footage. So the recording equipment was just born at the time, and De Martino used it very much. And through these machines, he gathered testimonies taken through these machines. He recorded lullabies, nursery rhymes, and popular sayings. So anything that could represent the daily life and anything that was beyond that in southern Italy. Anything that had to do with the religious worship, objects, events, preaching, any way of participating of people. And he discovered that a few kilometers away, different towns had different modalities. Italy is particularly rich with respect to this instance. Another anthropologist that we are going to cite is a Swede, which is Annertz. Of participating observation. It puts the anthropologist, which in direct contact with he comes to investigate or study, but we need a certain distance. To be objective, you also need to understand what people are doing in their actions, in their gestures. You need a measure that is balanced, because if you're too distant, you cannot see well. You will not be able to understand well what we are doing. But if we get too close, we become part of the scene of the painting, and we are not capable anymore to read exactly what the artist is trying to say. So at the time of De Martino, the cultures were very marked. The very ethnic groups were quite marked. The cultural heritage was shared and collective. So customs, beliefs, things such as traditional beliefs and ways of doing things. Tannerts realized that as we progressed in the 20th century and we were approaching the 21st, the world is changing. The culture, local culture is not there anymore. So imagine an ensemble of colors where all the colors mix together. So we do not have specific meanings of cultures, but we have traveling cultures, as he calls them. And so he says that cities are those places where you can find something that you're not looking for. Finding everything, even if we were not searching for that particular thing. And not only the attitudes change, but thoughts change. Modalities of transmission of thought change. We are here today from all over the world, and we can be here simultaneously thanks to technology. Information is at our hands in any moment. We can know things that are happening at the other side of the world. And this makes it possible that there is no territoriality that is marked like in the time of De Martino and beforehand. This completely transforms our cultures and challenges us. Interculturality is a challenge. It's something that we must handle with caution, and in any moment, we can eat Japanese, or dress Indian style, or speak English, or sleep in the Swedish manner. So what are our roots in this sea of relativism? How do we find an anchor? Something that guides us. Why can we not choose if we want to walk or change? We are part of the change. Our body renews its cells every X years, that the cells that make it up. If we take photographs of years ago, we recognize ourselves. So this is the challenge, recognizing ourselves even if we change. So continuing to have that sense of identity and belonging that characterize us, that will evolve over time though. The roots that can project us into the future. Italy has always been at the center of the Mediterranean. So Italy is like a natural bridge. It's always been visited and occupied by different populations, the Greeks, the Arabs, Byzantines, Lombards, Normans, and people who have left their testimonies in a cultural context, visible cultural context from a historical point of view, but visible in all of us. We are different. The color of our skin is different. Our eyes are different. Our faces are different. And so we are the product of history that Italy has been. So it is exactly for this that why do we need to maintain a connection, a strong connection with our past? Because this is what is happening. Every city, every town in Italy has at least a patron saint. Naples has 52 of them. And so one for every week of the year. So it's an anchoring that religion offers, which is very important. And despite globalization, despite the fact that we are without borders, we are this mixture of tradition and change. And due to this, it is important, the worship of San Domenico is important, specifically because it's not only part of our local heritage, not only Italian heritage, but it automatically becomes, with this transformation, part of the world, the global heritage. And so it constitutes the roots, thanks to which we can still continue to travel in the future. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much. Thank you for having connected our theme with the studies of these great anthropologists, generalizing what is so particular in this case. And it's even interesting, the final reflection of the cultural identity and religious of Italy and in general. I don't know if Father Efrem would like to say something in response to what has just been said. I'd like to thank Professor Di Bonito, because from a different point of view, I have completed what I wanted to express, because it's a worship that starts from a very small village with a very specific regional culture at that time, and that spread through different countries, and not only in Europe, but also into Asia and America. And her conclusion was a very nice surprise. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we may, from Italy, move down to Argentina, where Father Juan Pablo will help us understand the history of San Domenico in Soriano in Latin America. There's quite a bit of history in Latin America pertaining to San Domenico. Father Juan Pablo, I'm very happy to cede the word to you, to pass on the word to you. The devotion of Santo Domenico in the southern region of South America, the Order of Preachers, has two document moments in its history. The first of them occurs during the time of the Viceroyalty of Peru in 1542, the Captaincy General of Chile in 1541, later extending to that of the Viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata of 1776, and in the periods in which the region was under the direction of the provinces of the Order of San Juan Bautista del Peru of 1540 and of San Lorenzo Martir of Chile of 1586 and of St. Augustine of Argentina of 1724. The first of them is with the founding of the Mendoza Convent in 1563 by the brothers Friar Marcus Rengifo and Friar Antonino Perez, conventuals of the Santo Domingo Convent in Santiago de Chile. Placed under the protection of Santo Domingo in Soriano, this is how it appears in the documentation that is preserved from 1656. Unfortunately, we do not have more data, since the convent of Mendoza did not belong to the Argentine province, but to that of Chile until 1806. The destruction of the convent by the earthquake of 1861 has not left us a testimony of the worship to its owner. It is assumed that in the temple he had an altar in his honor. During my priory in said convent from 1992 to 1998, and on the occasion of the celebration of the 5th centennial of the evangelization of America, I entrusted the artist Marta Moyano Grafigna with the realization of a maiolica of the reproduction of the original painting. This was placed at the entrance of the convent so that through artistic expression, the meaning of the tile of the conventual patron is kept in mind for future generations. The artist accredits an outstanding degree of specialization, and the collection of works of her authorship is recognized. In the Plaza Italia in the city of Mendoza, she has covered the main fountain with more than 1,400 pieces of maiolica inspired by the floor of the Basilica of San Petronio in Bologna. But the most documented of that time is the so-called reduction of Santo Domenico in Soriano, in the current territory of the Republic of Uruguay, which depended on the Convent of Buenos Aires, founded in 1601. The reductions were indigenous settlements that existed during the Spanish evangelization of America. They were promoted by the authorities in order to instruct the population in Christianity and to give them a job. It was a kind of indigenous municipality. According to a traditional account of 1787, preserved in the Council of Soriano, he was a Dominican friar in the previous century, whose name is unknown, who began to evangelize the tribes of that region. A chief of the tribe of Chanas approached the friar and proposed to receive the doctrine of the faith. He was also going to invite his indigenous fellows to do the same without violating their freedom of choice. They freely adhered to their leader's decision. They introduced themselves to the governor of Buenos Aires, who allowed them to found the city. The foundation took place on September 15th, which is the feast of Sorianos, advocacy already assumed in the liturgy of the order. The mission was borne by the order until the 19th century and is the basis of the present city of Soriano. Until 1906, his chapel had a painting representing Soriano's miracle. Unfortunately, it was burned in a fire. In a second moment of devotion to San Dominic in Soriano takes place in the 19th century. The Argentine Republic, already established, presents itself to the world as a powerful, progressive nation according to the canons of the time. On the other hand, since 1857, on the initiative of Master Jandal, the restoration of strict observance in the province was established, choosing the convent of Cordoba, the center and model of the school. The great European immigration, especially the Spanish and Italian ones, brought the influence of the European style to all branches of fine arts. They found a space for expression in temples and convents. The convent of Cordoba was rebuilt, inspired by the Spanish Benedictine monastery of Silos. The church of the convent of Cordoba, which became the main center of studies, was decorated in its vaults with motifs of the traditional devotion of the order for the edification of the student brothers and the faithful, as it is the main sanctuary of the diocese under the patronage of the Madonna del Rosario, the Virgin of the Rosary. The decoration was made by Onorio Mossi from Piemonte, born in 1861 in Cambriano in the province of Turin. He arrived in Argentina in 1889. The following year, he settled in the city of Cordoba. He had graduated from the Albertina Academy in Turin, where he had as teachers Cesare Gamba and Andrea Gastaldi. In his workshop, a generation of artists was formed, including that of our brother painter, Friar Guglielmo Butler, born in Italy, and who was of the order the most prominent figure of Argentinian culture of the 20th century until present time. In 1897, the frescoes were commissioned to be made in the Church of Santo Domingo. In the vaults of the Dominican temple, Onorio Mossi made a valuable frescoes on scenes from the life of Santo Domingo de Guzman. Mossi's paintings addressed themes that may have been suggested to them by the community itself, or may have been a choice of the artist himself. They are beautiful and very well executed. Among these motives, he painted the miracle of Soriano on the left side of the aisle, perhaps as an echo of the miracle of 1871, which prompted a letter from the master of the order on preaching. In 1911, Onorio Mossi left Cordoba and settled in the city of Tucumán, where he died in 1943 at the age of 82. Santo Domenico in Soriano had a special role in the order in this region in the aspects mentioned in the relationship between art and preaching. In the first, under the support of the crown that had a special devotion to him, which the order echoed, the cult, the worship of him spread throughout the whole empire where the sun did not set. Given its contemporaneity with the period of the first evangelization, it inspired the apostolic task of the friars, who placed their missions and convents under its dedication, elaborating a pictorial art which expressed this event and provoking the miraculous event, the attraction of the new Christians. In the second, in the transformation of Argentina with a project of national organization, eager to incorporate the country into the concert of the great nations of the world, a European style is assumed in the aesthetic expressions, especially in architecture and architecture ornamentation, as well, aimed at the new European population, which entrusted these artists with the execution of their living and worship spaces. The temples and convents joined this movement and used its expressions as means of preaching. Providentially, I have had the grace to preach the Triduum in preparation for the feast of St. Dominic in Soriano on the occasion of its annual feast in 2007 during my stay at the General Curia. It has been a way of thanking the graces that his dedication has given to our province throughout more than 4 centuries of its history. Thank you so much. So we are all very grateful to Father Juan Pablo for this exploration of the presence and the role of St. Dominic in Soriano in Latin America. I don't know if Father Efrem would like to make a comment in function of what has just been said. Certainly, I'd like to thank my brother, Father Juan Pablo. I have been quite certain about this story between Argentina and Uruguay. And so I thank you for this more precise information, because sometimes we depend on secondary sources, and it is very precious to hear someone that knows the terrain so close with such great proximity to avoid errors and confusion. So it is very important to hear his voice from the source, from the continent where this worship has developed. Thank you so much. Thank you, Father Efrem. So we've reached certain moments for the discussion, and we have received an interesting question from a participant from Africa, where he says that in certain languages, it is difficult to distinguish between the different types of honor that is due to God and to the Virgin Mary, to the images. There is that distinction is not to be found in some languages. For example, of his languages in Africa, these distinctions are very difficult to make. So in this context, how can we make this type of distinction? Because he himself feels ill at ease, because some things treat the images as a way, are not treated correctly according to the Christian tradition. So he's asking for some advice. So how do we approach this situation? My commentary, my word of advice? Yes, of course, willingly, gladly, I'd like to start with a question for all of us. And are we capable in our languages to distinguish? We have adapted the Greek word doulea, from which we've developed the hyperdulia and the latria, but nor do we in our languages have a word, an original word or appropriate word. Our terminology, even in Italian, but even in my native language, starts from these Greek words and eventually Latin words, and tries to adopt them as much as possible and to adapt them to the grammar of the language in question. I'm not an expert in languages, and not even an expert in African language, of course. And so I can't do anything but to remind this phenomenon, you of this phenomenon that is accepted, common phenomenon. So rarely do we find a language so adapted to present a term adequately. So we are speaking about a universal church. So if I can say my modest opinion, if possible, I would think of a form that comes from Dulia or Latria, as we mentioned before. So I suggest using these, which is something that functions, that works. Your suggestion is that we should come back to the Greek words and try to utilize them in the catechesis of the popers, of normal people, regular people, to help them distinguish between these various types. Or else, if we can't manage to do that, maybe the reformers probably were right, exactly, because it is a delicate matter. We risk, if we don't do this, of simplifying language or to exclusively use the language of one's place. So we risk idolatry. But on the other hand, we must not lose this value of the Christian faith, the communion of saints, and with practical consequences, but we need a differentiated type of worship. I don't see any other way, because it is very important for people. It's not a speculative theology that we can teach to all countries. This is not necessary. In this case, I think that we risk two quite serious things: to confound the worship to God, or to deprive them of this grace. The correct communion with the saints through the worship of images, etc. We hope that so I would like to ask another question, because our general topic of this conference, COMMUNITAS, is preaching and the arts. So we always try to explore the connection between these two things. In your speech, Father Efrem, you highlighted that this image of Saint Dominico in Soriano is considered an acheropita, meaning not made by human hand. And at the same moment, you had to cite in your speech, you had to highlight the role of this extraordinary canvas as an instrument of transmission, of conveyance of certain Christian values that belong to a real sense of preaching. So my question is, when we see works of art in churches, we see things made by human hand, not an acheropita in this sense. How important is it to your topic that this image is considered that has a divine origin? How important is that? Does this form of preaching take inspiration? Could it take inspiration from work of art made by hand as well, by man? Thank you for this question. It is an important question. 3 points briefly. As I said, I am not competent to decide this mystery that has been examined over a period of centuries, first thing. And I have eliminated this theme from my speech, and I've mentioned it as a common opinion. And the other thing that all researchers who have tried to identify some school, painting school, have not reached a plausible conclusion. there are suspicions of 2 or 3 painters, but there isn't one comparative, like in other cases. For example, the hand of Saint Dominic that holds the lily is very similar to the hand of an angel in Naples. So you see, I don't see it as sufficient, this statement. But the third point that I wanted to mention, this is not it is not essential for our preaching, and even less for the values that we need to convey and want to convey. If this image is really of divine origin or miraculous origin, of course we can accept this. It's not against our faith. But if it is not, if it is at the hand of someone from Calabria or Naples, nothing really changes, because what we preach is the resurrected Christ with his saints, with the Virgin Mary, who are alive. And we use different ways, words, images, to remind, to have people come closer to the true reality that is certainly not of this world. But if the means has used a path of miracles or that of a human hand or not, here nothing changes. What the image of Saint Dominic says, it is always objective, it is always true, despite the origin of the painting. I think that this is important as well. It is a very interesting question, but for what pertains to preaching and the message that the preaching conveys, nothing really changes. It does not take away, it does not add. Those values that we would like to bring forward, like the grace of God that operates through the saints, which Christ, it does not depend on this. Yes, thank you. I think that we could discuss this even more, but I don't want to go beyond the time that has been allocated to our session. So I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Father Efrem, for your speech, your presentation, and our 2 respondents for their interactions. And I would also like to make a couple of final considerations. The first thing is that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the site of the conference very soon. And I would like to invite all those who are present to the next encounter that will be next Monday, May 3rd, in the morning, to facilitate the participation for people from Asia. The speaker is a professor, Ruth Henderson, and the whole session will be in English. And of course, we will have the simultaneous translation in Italian. And the title will be Inculturation in the 10th Century, the Poet, Preacher, and the Dream of the Rude. We will have a respondent who is someone who is studying for a doctorate here in the Faculty of Philosophy, and a friar, an African friar, who will speak from the point of view of an expert on enculturation. I would also like to invite everyone to enroll to our website so that we can also, so that you can also obtain this beautiful bag, which is something that we offer to anyone who enrolls. And you can always pass by at the Angelicum to collect one, or if you are outside and you don't have the possibility of coming, you can always paying the fee, the postage, a sample that we can send to you. So I thank you very much for your presence. I hope that you have been interested by this topic, and we will continue to eviscerate the relationship, preaching and the arts, in the next webinar. Have a good evening to all of you, and till next time, thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you for the invitation. Good evening to all. Good evening, and hope to see you soon.